Hello, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk About It. We're here to investigate incest and destigmatize childhood sexual crimes. Tonight, I'm very honored to have Bill Murray with me. Bill Murray is the founder of the National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse. He started that in 2009. It's a nonprofit, and he also hosts or has other people help him host a 5 night a week talk radio show that I have listened to. I've been on. It's very good stuff. We'll put all of this in here. So, Bill, welcome tonight. We're so happy to hear you. I am going to learn your story with our listeners. I don't know your story. The first thing I'd like to ask, though, is your motivation for starting this national association and also your motivation to do all the work that you do around these childhood crimes.
Okay, well, Jody, my story goes back a long time. I'm kind of an older person, but
I
I'm
love having
also
you here.
40 years into I'm 40 years into recovery, and and I'm kind of proud of that.
It's
I'm also
awesome.
40 years sober and 40 years clean from drugs. So this was significant, and I started it because I struggled a great deal trying to find help. I tried to find help at the very beginning of my journey, and but everybody who I went to kicked me out pretty much. They didn't understand that a little boy could be abused back then. So I struggled to find places that could help me. And when I started to find places that could help me, there was always, or frequently, there was an objection that I had to some of what they did and how they did it. And so that was, it didn't encourage me to keep going in that place, in that to that place. So when I was 25 years sober, I I was helping my mother at the end of her life. She got Alzheimer's. And when she got Alzheimer's, I knew that she wouldn't know what I was doing. And so I started the National Association of Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, or NAASCA. My father and my sister had both deceased before. But I had had an experience where I told my family what had happened to me when I was 27 or 28 in a psychiatrist's office, no less, that my father nearly had a heart attack, and my mother was very upset. They had no inkling that this had been going on with me for years. Um, and when I revealed it to them, they were shocked. They were just simply shocked. So I didn't want to, I made a promise to myself as I got sober that I would use my story in the rooms, in the rooms of AA and talking to people individually and so forth. But I'd never take a public platform about my own story until they were gone. So that's what happened. 2009, my
Okay.
mother got Alzheimer's, and she died a couple of years later, a year and a half later. Yeah.
And
So
then
I
you
launched it.
were okay. I that's wow. You just said a lot. That's a lot, Bill. And wow. I mean, it's so honorable that you waited and so that you didn't cause more pain to your parents.
Exactly.
But all,
I had made myself the promise that I would do that. So I
right.
lived it
And
out.
I just have to say to you, I'm sorry for that because as a victim of these crimes, you deserved a whole lot of comfort around that. And isn't that funny that we often take care of the people around us instead of receiving comfort? So, anyway, if you could bring us into that story as much as you're comfortable with so that we, just understand what it was that you revealed in a psychiatrist's office, which I think is very smart. I also, my adult daughters and my husband, I took with me to my counselor's office because I'd spent almost 20 years with him. And it's easier, isn't it, for us to have our family there and to have kind of that support of, our counselor or psychiatrist with us helping us. So if you want to bring us a little bit into your story, that'd be great.
Well, first thing I'd like to say is I did not know this man. He was a neutral person, but I
Mhm.
chose to go to him. My parents didn't know him. I didn't know him. My girlfriend at the time who joined us didn't know him. But we picked him because he was a medical doctor. If he's a psychiatrist, he's also a medical doctor. And therefore, he might be able to handle my father's heart attack if he had one. The man was shocked at what I told my parents, just like my parents were shocked. and his mouth fell open. He had nothing to offer me,
Mm.
nothing back then. And so, but it was a neutral place where I could tell my story and not be afraid that something would happen to
Oh,
anybody in the
I
room out
see.
of shock. So anyway, that's why I chose him.
Right. Well, it was a very different
And
time
he
40
was in
years ago.
Manhattan. Well, I kept the secret to not hurt them, but I didn't keep the secret completely because what the promise I made was that I wouldn't go public with my story. But that didn't mean I wouldn't talk about it in small groups and to
That's
individuals
one
and
and
in
heal.
meetings. Um, I was a 12 stepper,
Hmm.
right? And I was a 12 stepper,
Right.
an
So it could stay
Alcoholics Anonymous
anonymous
member.
then.
And that's where I shared it. And you're not supposed to share that stuff in there. At least you weren't then. And but the elders in the group said, "Look, we don't know what you're talking about. We don't have that experience, but it's okay if you just keep on telling a story because we also don't know who coming in behind you needs to hear it." I mean, they gave me
Absolutely.
permission.
And
So that
I
was
know that many of us that have come through these crimes, Bill, go to addiction of all kinds of things to numb out the
yes,
pain and the confusion of it and all of that. So I'm sure you've
yeah.
done remarkably well in helping by sharing those stories, even though I know sometimes they don't like you to in those meetings.
Well, they gave me permission, like I say, so that freed me up, and I felt like
That's cool.
anybody else, that was my home group. Anybody
Yeah.
objects, I'll say, "Well, in my home group, they let me," you know.
Right, right, right.
But
So at what time did your abuse start? How old were you?
I was 11. I went to a summer camp. My parents sent me to a summer camp where I was eventually going 3 years in a row, a month at a time, 3 years in a row each summer. And and then at the end of this a third year, one of the people that was a counselor at the summer camp knew my parents very well by then. He he offered to take their son, me, on a trip, a 2 or 3 week trip to Expo '67, which was a big kind of a World's Fair type thing in Montreal, Canada. So that was the end of the relationship that this guy had on me. But he met me the first probably the first couple of days I was there, the first year I was there, and started playing with me right away. And I was shocked. I froze like a stone,
Right,
and didn't know what it was. I had never even heard the word sex. Never. I was 11. My parents were
right.
very conservative and very kind of shut down in that sense. So, and we were Catholic. So this guy was actually a brother in the Catholic Church, and he was a camp counselor. He was also the camp's photographer, and he maintained the Olympic swimming pool and some other things. So he had a job there during the summer, and I was to go 3 years in a row. And each of those 3 years, he took thousands and thousands of pictures of me, and he molested me in many, many different ways. But he never even undressed in front of me. He never asked me to do anything to him until that trip. And by then,
Mm.
my parents, who knew him very well, said, "Oh, isn't that a wonderful opportunity for Bill? Well, thank you very much for having And
Right.
off we went. Or actually, they put me in a bus in Virginia and sent me to New York City. And I got off at the Port Authority, and he met me there. And outside the Port Authority was the first time he exposed himself to me in the car he had. Uh, he pulled out his penis and he tried to get me to give him fellatio, and I wouldn't give him a blowjob, But there were people all around us, and it was a bus station. There were buses passing, so people had the high perspective, and I was like, "What is he doing?"
Wow, right.
Um,
Because now he's got you away from your parents.
exactly. And
Yeah,
I call it being kidnapped. Really. It was not
absolutely.
expected.
I agree.
He had lied about it. Yeah. Well, I got an objection from somebody one day. Oh, it's no big deal. I do use the word um, kidnap because that's what it felt like. I didn't know where I was. I didn't know how to escape. There wasn't a
Right.
911 system.
You're a child though.
This was
You know what, Bill, I have to agree with you. That is because he's groomed you and your parents for years before, and now you're at the mercy of
okay.
everybody. You're a child.
That's right. So he, just to make a long story short, he took me to, he had his regular job was as a teacher in a high school in Brooklyn. So he took me there for one of the first things he did. And there was a dark room there too. He had a dark room in the camp and a dark room at the, and he continued to take pictures of me, kind of naked little boy pictures. uh,
Right.
and it eventually took thousands. But that was one of the first places he took me. Then he took me to, I think it was Coney Island or something, and he played with me under the boardwalk. And then he took me to somebody's apartment, like a penthouse apartment, where there was a man and a young boy. Tried to get me to interact with them, and I refused. He took me to um, he took me to a number of places where he tried to set me up with. Obviously, these were people in a community he
Right.
belonged to that were
Yes, that
that were
sounds very clear. He
pedophiles.
was well connected in the pedophile ring, wasn't he?
Yeah, and then he took me north to I think it was New Hampshire or Vermont. Well, that's where another camp existed, and it turned out that that camp was a kind of a nudist camp for little boys. So the
Oh
parents,
man.
when they came, the little boys were instructed to dress. So on the weekends they were dressed with at least shorts, but on the when as soon as the parents were gone, naked kids.
And this was
And I
nineteen
was,
sixty seven.
yeah, how did you guess that?
Well,
It
right.
was.
Yeah. Well, because you talked about going on this trip with him, and a lot of my abuse occurred in 68, 69. What people don't realize is the world was a very different place back then, very different. They could get away with anything, and they did.
Yeah. Well, we were on our way to see Expo 67,
Right.
and actually we took a we took a ride on the throughway all night long. It seemed like till we got to Montreal, and then he stood me in front of a couple other exhibits, including the Habitat, which was a famous one, and took a few pictures of me in front of the Habitat, like snapshot type thing, so that he could prove that I was there. And he was angry, boy. We got stopped by a cop. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to do. He was
Right.
speeding, and he was talking to the officer, and he showed him his documents, and and he has Reverend such and such on his documents, and the cop let him go. Didn't figure out that I was in any kind of distress, and I didn't say anything. So he took me back. He was very pissed off. Took me back to New York, um, and put me on the Port Authority. That's the last I ever saw of him. But I went home, and a week or two later, I was destined to arrive at a prep school, which was a minor seminary for Benedictine monks. And I had asked to go to this place because we were extremely Catholic. And um, to me, there wasn't anybody important, any job more important than priesthood. And so I went. My parents took me there. They dropped me off. I had there were only 30 kids in the class, so we settled in a little bit. But really, the first week or two I was there, a priest came to me and said, "Have you ever had any homosexual experiences?" And it really surprised me. I went, "No, no, no," because of course I was in total denial to everybody around me.
Right.
Um,
Well, you don't even have
and
words for it at the
uh,
time, Bill.
I heard him on the. I mean, I learned what I learned about sexuality on the playground after that first year, and then the second
Mm-hmm.
year. But it was playground language.
Mm-hmm.
It was faggot and goof. What, I don't know. You know the words. I can't think of them.
Right, right,
I don't use
right.
them. But so I said, "No, Father, I haven't." And he asked me another time, or two later. I said, "No, I haven't." And another time, a third time, he asked, and I said to myself, I better talk to this guy. He knows something. So I went down with him to his room, which was a kind of a bedroom office combination. He lived in the same building all us boys did, and and I told him the whole story. just like I'm telling you, but with even more detail. It took a couple hours at least, and at the end of it, he had called it a confession, so I believed it was. And I don't know how Catholic you are or how much you know about Catholicism, but
Not much.
confession is a big deal.
Right,
it's
right, right. I mean,
it's a
I know that
sacrament,
from the
and it's
movies and that sort of thing, but not personal experience.
yeah. Well, we were much more casual at the prep school at St. Vincent's than the parish church. Parish church, you go in a stall and there's a priest there, that's stuff. But you can have sitting on the corner of the bed in somebody's bedroom. And that's what we did. Um, he heard the confession. He gave me some penance, which are usually prayers that you say afterwards. And he
Hmm.
gave me absolution. Absolution being he forgave me for my sins. And
Wow.
when I left his room, I felt great because, finally I told somebody in a healthy way. And I even, got the absolution. So, but it turned out that he himself was uh, somehow connected to the pedophiles that were in this place, in
I
the
had a
art chamber.
feeling that you were going to
There were
say
about
that. Yeah, right.
there
They're
were
so
there were
good at
250
grooming.
priests in the monastery.
Wow.
So that began the next 2 years. I spent 2 years running away from priests and brothers who, and some upperclassmen and so forth who were interested in me physically, and I was not interested. I never was interested in guys,
Right.
never attracted to men. Couldn't. That's one thing I couldn't understand. How did this
Well,
happen?
they
So
were
anyway,
yeah, they were predators.
oh, it's terrible predators.
Yes, it is
So when I
terrible.
came back from summertime in sophomore year, I think I'd had a growth spurt, and I was taller, I was kind of thicker, my voice had changed, and I was pissed. They could
Right.
tell. So they gave me started like that. But the 5 years between the 3 years that I was molested at the camp and the 2 years at St. Vincent, and then I stayed there subsequently another 2 years till I graduated. But those were hell for me, and that was my story.
Man, that's
And
a long time, Bill.
I had never been allowed to drink, so I had to wait till I went to college. And I chose a college that was pretty secular. It's the University of Toronto in Canada. And I, I drank a lot. I drank like a fish. I took beer 101, guitar, and women. And I didn't finish
And
university.
left all the memories behind if you
When I
could,
went
right? For a
back
minute
to,
at least.
I couldn't. I would drink to oblivion. I didn't know how to drink either. You know,
Right.
I drank to oblivion because I wanted out of me, kind of.
Yes.
It's like
Yes.
mental suicide, to kill yourself.
Right.
And I dropped out of school after 2.5 years, and I went to back down to the New York area, and I got an apartment in Brooklyn Heights, which was a shabby neighborhood, but you could tell it was coming. It was starting to come back up. And in Brooklyn Heights, I had a number of different jobs, and I was kind of living around, almost around the street. But I at one point decided I'd go back to school, and I went to NYU, New York University, and I attended the Gallatin division, the film and TV and journalism departments,
Mm.
and I was there for another year and a half, and I didn't get a degree. I quit just before I would have gotten a degree. I needed a few more credits, but in my mind, you don't need a degree.
I've learned
This
it
is
all.
part of my story. And but my girlfriend at the time, which is the same girl that went to meet my parents, um, had lived in California once, and she wanted to go back, and I didn't want to go back to California, ugh. But I did. And in 1980, came to California. Been here lived in other places too, but that's how long I've been attached to California. And I came here basically for show business, which I had a career in, but not a big deal successful career, not one of those. But I did okay. In time to time, I did better than others. I ended up in the Editors Guild for film and TV editing, and that was a good period of time, which paid fairly well and so forth. But um, I never made it big. I didn't. I never was a success, whatever that is. Um,
Whatever that is, right?
Except in the fact that I do have a small house in the area, and now I'm married to another woman, but a wonderful wife, and you know I'm uh, I'm free to do what I want to do, including starting up NAASCA when it felt appropriate. And I went to Florida because my sister had passed away, and she was my mother's caregiver, and my mother had just recently been taken to Florida by Jane to live in a very nice senior citizen facility that my father
Mm.
had managed to save enough money for. So she lived very high on the hog the rest of her life. Um,
Oh, that's
but then she got the
nice.
Alzheimer's. Yeah.
Right,
But I was
right.
going forth, back and forth, back and forth, half a year here, half a year there for quite a few years. Yeah,
So what
since 2000, I
how
guess.
old were you then,
So
Bill, when you decided you need to begin exploring telling your story and find some healing for this? Were you in your 20s?
30. I
You were
got sober
30.
when I was 30. Yeah,
Oh,
and
okay.
and I heard in reading the big book, which is the basic text of Alcoholics Anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
I, I read that what we had here, the 12 steps were not really only about alcohol. They were designed for living. That
Mm-hmm.
worked if you applied them to any other topic that you could and that you needed. And I didn't know
Right.
what I needed, but
No, I agree.
I needed
They've
help.
overused the
And so
word trauma
I,
as far as I'm concerned, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. You needed help figuring out your
so well,
story.
that's what happened. Horrible. It
So
was
it was
horrible.
the so it
There
was
were no,
the it was actually do working the steps that actually helped you kind of come
yeah,
into who you were.
yeah. I applied the steps to to drinking, to using drugs, and to alcohol, and to child abuse, and all equally. So the 12 steps are kind of a toolkit that you can
Mm-hmm.
pull out to whatever you need. One of the things that you need is the 12th step itself is having had a spiritual awakening as the result of the other steps. We try to carry this message to others and practice these principles in all our affairs.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I was motivated to um, start NAASCA.
So through a spiritual awakening. So you talk and this is interesting. I always like to ask people when you're a child and here you are in this religious setting, you're raised religious, but where was God for you when all of this was occurring around you, Bill? What did that feel like?
Well, we were very involved with Catholicism, and I came from a big Catholic family. I think I had 60 something cousins, first cousins. And I had my father's family was a big one, 13 siblings. So they all had 8 or 9 kids except ours. We had two. Um, but everybody went to church. Everybody was involved in the community. Everybody was in the fire department. Everybody worked at the parish. Everybody worked at the hospital. Those
Mm-hmm.
were the kinds of jobs. Many were cops, cops and firemen and nurses was the big.
Right.
We didn't miss one Sunday, ever of mass. And I started to get involved uh, in well, my sister went to Catholic school all the way through. I sometimes went to Catholic school and sometimes to lay school because I kind of had a challenge how to be comfortable. I was never comfortable, and when I was a certain age, I don't know what age that is. Around the time I was being arrested, I was asked to serve mass. It's there are two boys that go up on the altar with the priest, and on the altar that the boys help with. So I was an altar boy for several years. Um, we were just very, very, very involved in Catholic Church. We had the priests over for dinner sometimes. In fact, my father's uh, close friend was a Monsignor who later became a bishop, and my father went to work for him at a charity in Manhattan. And
And so while you're an altar boy, you're being molested. Does this make you angry at God, or does this make you just see it all like this is all just part and parcel of it?
I was not too analytical for a while. I just it was happening, and I just let it happen for a while. But um, eventually, I was really pissed at God and church and priests, all priests. I learned in AA that I wasn't really angry at all priests. I was angry at priests that were pedophiles, and I
Right.
wasn't angry at all of Catholicism. I was angry at that part of it that allowed for this phenomenon of child sexual abuse to occur, and it had for centuries.
You stay with Catholicism, or did you have this other spiritual awakening? I'm just always curious how this plays out in life.
Well, again, one of the tenets in Alcoholics Anonymous is that you can start your own. You can create your own God. A God of your understanding is what it's called, and it's right
Mm.
in the steps that you would turn your will and your life over to the care of God as we understand Him. And so, what that means is everybody can belong to AA. There's no set religion or anything like that. Same with NAASCA, by the way, or none at all. Like an atheist or an agnostic. Um, and they encourage you to create your own higher power. So hopefully, what you can do, and I was able to, you can kind of carry with you the sense of a higher power that's different than the one that you were brought up with or you read about in the Bible, because the Bible is very strict. And I did not want strict. My parents were strict. I knew strict. Didn't want strict.
Right,
Um,
right,
didn't want punishing.
right.
You know. So my is um, very tolerant, not punishing. Um, Loves me for what I'm able to do, not doesn't hate me for what I'm not able to do. A
Right,
very
right.
positive kind of higher power. That's
So,
who, that's who I
yep, and
became a
that's
believer.
absolutely fine. Yeah, I appreciate that. I just think so often, like you said, I did when you said there was a time when I was very angry at God. So often it's true, God didn't hurt us, but you know, those are just the responses we have, right? Because if he's omnipresent and supposed to be everywhere, where was he when all of this stuff was happening, right? So it's kind of a pretty normal feeling for a child to have. But I'm curious how this played out in your adult life. So you go
Well,
into AA and you're 30 years old, and now where do you really find that the trauma is playing out in your life, or all those years of being sexually victimized as a child? How does that play out in your life as a young man?
well, I still have character defects that identify as being part of uh, the journey of trauma that I went through, that I'm still going through, I believe, to some degree. And I've always had them. So I've been watchful for those things. I believe that, you said that a lot of us um, turn to drugs and women and
Mm-hmm.
money, and
Mm-hmm.
being and driving fast cars and all kinds of things. We're obsessive and compulsive, and that's our norm. So I was, kind of careful about most of these things, but my anger at God, just to go back for a moment,
Mm-hmm.
that began in the prep school when I realized it wasn't just the one guy in the camp, but it was the priests and brothers at the prep school who
Mm-hmm.
were wrong. They were wrong. I didn't know how exactly, and so probably sometime around the time that I said I came back after sophomore year and had a growth spurt, I was kind of angry. I was angry at
Mm-hmm.
God too in the church, and I knew I was not going to continue on to become a priest, which is why we were all there. We were there to
Mm.
consider the possibility someday of becoming a priest.
Right. And
None of us ever did, and I didn't.
Well, and it's
Go ahead.
interesting, Bill, you talked about that even some of the young boys who were actually students there became predators because they
Yeah,
were probably, they had been obviously groomed, molested, and then they become predators. And it's unique that some of us, like you and I, do not become pedophiles, but there are others who the way that they deal with it instead of getting angry is they become one of them. It's very interesting. I talked to my counselor about that. What makes some people different than other people? And he said, we really don't know. And it's just interesting to me because think about that. You had abusers all around you. How could you not be angry? I mean, listening to the story, right? Like my entire childhood was filled with that as well. My father started when I was 3 or 4, and it didn't end until I left his house at 18. I got married and left, and so yeah, you leave with a lot of anger, but then, like you say, also, we don't know how to work it out. I was very passive when I was young. I'm not that way anymore, but I used to. I was married to an abusive man for 18 years, and he came back when he got cancer and talked to me and our girls, and he said, Jody, I could do anything to you. And it's sad that some of those residual effects that stay with us is even
yeah,
if we're angry, we stay too passive, right? Or then some people go so angry they end up in prison. Like there's all of these things. And I
that's right.
I kind of went the way of, being passive, and I've tried to balance that. But there really are these residual effects. And like you just said, I think I'm still dealing with some of them. Can you
Oh yeah,
articulate some of those things? And the reason I like to say that is so often people, when they're listening to our stories, they identify with it, right? And it just helps us all know that I think that many of us have and share the same challenges as we move through the years after coming through these victimizations, right? And like you said, there weren't words like trauma. Like Oprah opened up that can of worms and then everybody's been talking about it. But, childhood sexual crimes are one of the worst. They violate places that should never be violated. And that's a very difficult thing then to close down and bring peace around and, stop the suffering because often there's a lot of pain involved with it. Even when people talk about the pleasure, it's still a very painful experience for children because
right.
we have no kind of understanding around it whatsoever. So our minds can't even comprehend what's happening, right? And so those things that stay in our lives, they
Yeah,
do affect us all the time. Sometimes I'll have just a really bad day remembering something that comes back because I can have a pain in my body and it could be a pain that feels like something that happened in childhood. And I'll tell you, Bill, talk about a trigger. I'm having a bad mood. And all of a sudden I realize I'm having a really bad mood. And I don't usually realize till the next day that something was triggering me. And then it brings me back to that place. And I feel like that little girl with a broken part of my body again from the damage. So, can you talk a little bit about what that looked like for you and the things that you still struggle to? Like you say, you're like me. I'm sure, you're doing fine in life and we get through these, but it's constant work for us. It is a life sentence. I mean, I don't care how much you heal and how much you use your steps. It's a life sentence. We don't know when a piece of our past will fly into our face. While we know how to cope with it today, it's still triggering, right?
yes, and it's kind of a surprise sometimes when they show up
Yes.
again because you think you're doing so well and you're
Oh,
just
it's
moving
so
along and
true.
everything's going, and then bam, it's like, whoa, I thought I dealt
Exactly.
with that.
Isn't that true? And
Um,
that's tragic to me. I always hope that's not going to happen. And in fact, I woke up the other day, Bill, I have to tell you, and I had just a really hard night. I actually even kind of woke up crying because that memory, it was a really horrible memory when I was about 17. And I thought the next day, I don't want to think this anymore, but I can't stop that. I was sleeping, you know what I mean? Like, and it just sometimes comes back. And I knew how to take care of it. I knew how to, get through it the next day. But it saddens me that that's just the reality of my childhood, right?
I have spent a lot of nights tossing and turning. I don't do it that much anymore, but I used to.
Right.
And a lot of it was about the past, not necessarily the drinking past or the drug using past, but just part of the past that
Right.
was that I, I wish I didn't have to go through or I wanted to stop thinking about. And I couldn't stop. It's you're obsessed with these things. So there are a number of characteristics that have shown up in my life. For example, I'm intolerant, and this is mostly of others, but also of me. Both of these things would be for me and others. I'm not very kind. I think sometimes um, I'm not too patient. Sometimes I'm I have expectations, like with, and I'll just say with NAASCA, for example, the expectation was that there would be more people that took NAASCA seriously enough to take on responsibilities. And for a while, there were, but then people drifted away and they went on. And sometimes they started their own nonprofit. Sometimes they joined somebody else. Whatever it was, I've had
Mm-hmm.
a hard time. I've had a hard time stepping back from it because if I don't continue work working fairly hard, I'm afraid NAASCA will disappear. And that's the one thing that I didn't want to happen. I wanted to
Right.
leave something I thought had real value, and I still do, real value for every type of child abuse victim, and for every sex, every religion, every everything.
Mm-hmm.
We don't measure anybody, uh, and everybody's invited to join.
Yes.
And
And
you
by the
join by
way,
saying you're in.
yes, and I will put all of that information in the notes if you're listening, both everywhere on my podcast and on YouTube. I'll put Bill's information. It really is a fantastic organization, and you can also go on and tell your story. You can be part of a call-in radio
Yes,
show that has question and
yes.
answers. And Bill, you have to remember you've been doing this since 2009, and there's a lot of good work. Don't I don't think I understand because I do a lot to give back too, because I think it does help bring some sense around the pain in our life and just bring some good to it, right? I think the essence of a healed life is to give back. So I really honor what you do. I think it's beautiful. And I'm trying to do the same thing too, and it's always kind of this constant work. Sometimes I back off because I started doing this more often, and then I just do it once a week. So I understand that, but it is a beautiful thing, and I would encourage anybody to look up his show, be part of it, go on and tell your story. It's a really beautiful platform. They have it designed very well. They remind you. It's very good. And I'll put all of that information in the notes. But I do understand that, Bill. And I
Well,
think that you've done a lot, is what I'm trying to say. I think you should be encouraging
well, no
yourself.
question. Well, no
Yeah, you've done
question.
a
But I'm
lot.
70 years old now. I turned 70.
Did
And
you?
I'm tired. I'm tired.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
shocked when I turned 70. How did that happen? But
Right.
but I
Right.
am, and I've had a couple of surgeries that have been tough and so forth. So this is life on life terms. Life continues. It continues to happen.
Right.
But what I was hoping that I could pass on NAASCA in a healthy way to probably a small group of people, wouldn't be one, but it's a small group of people that would be the stewards for the future. That's all.
Right.
I'm not,
Right.
I'm not bummed. Maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't. But that was one of my goals originally. So we'll
Right.
see.
Yeah. Well, that's
Now,
beautiful. It
Stop
is.
Child Abuse Now with a radio show. Scan Stop Child Abuse Now, and it's on the front page of the website. How to join it, how to find shows, and so forth. You said an important thing. We're consistently looking for new guests because we do this show 5 nights a week, and
Right.
3 of those 5 nights are people telling their stories. So it's a lot of people who have told their stories. We've done 3,600 shows.
Wow,
It's
Bill, that's
another most.
incredible.
You know,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
incredible. Yeah,
So
Kim
we
was saying,
constantly need people coming
yes,
in.
yes,
Joining
and
us.
yep, and I will put that on there for sure. It's true. So you said you talked about telling your parents, and one of the things I think that crimes of childhood that are so terrible is you again were taking care of them to stop the suffering. And as a child you needed someone taking care of you to help that. And I think of course now you're 70 and they're gone, and you fulfilled your commitment not to say that. But it saddens me because that little boy, he needed that. Well, I think it's beautiful that your parents came around that. You said that when you talked to them about it, they obviously were very comforting to you. It was painful for them, but did you guys talk about it a lot? Did you only talk about it that one time in the psychiatrist's office?
More than once, but not very many more than once. The last thing my father said when he came and visited me once here in Los Angeles was he and I were waiting for the plane that he was going to get on, and he started crying in the waiting room. And I said, "What's
Oh.
the matter?" He said, I should have done better. I wasn't a very good father, stuff like this. I said, "Don't be silly. You did the best you could, and I love you. I always loved my parents."
Hmm.
My mother, on the other side, she had an element of cruelty, actually, um, and it wasn't always in her, but it was sometimes. And I think she had been raised in a situation where um, she was 6 years younger than her only sibling, another girl, and she just didn't. She couldn't really relate to people like my father, one of 13, could, But
Yeah.
anyway, she she could she could get angry like that, and I didn't admire that, so I avoided that happening with me as much as I could. I would look at my folks, I would look at people around me, and I would see their behavior. I would see the behavior of other groups when I started getting sober, and I'd say, I don't want that. I want this over here, or something
Right.
different. So that is compiled, really made up of all kinds of things that are a reflection of things that I wish had happened for me when I was a couple years sober or a couple years in recovery. And so I offer them, it's a we thing. We offer them to the newcomer now.
And what and
Yeah.
share those things. You said I wish I had a few things. What were articulate those for us, if you will.
Well, NAASCA doesn't have any rules. I mean, we ask for decorum in the meetings and so forth, but we don't have rules. And some groups just on
Hmm.
that level, for example, when you're in a meeting, they only let you share for 1 minute or one time during the meeting, or and you have to stay on the same topic, or you can't respond to somebody else. And this is ridiculous. This should
Oh yeah,
be
we're
a.
like that's like a
Uh,
12-step AA meeting, right? You can't cross talk and that sort of thing.
it's also other groups though that do it, and some of them are devoted just to trauma recovery. Anyway, if I found things like that, I, I didn't like that. We're
Hmm.
completely free. We don't charge a cent for anything we do. Ever have, never will. And
Right.
another one is that we have a lot of they're all volunteers, so we don't even have anybody we hire, except we
Mhm.
have a tax guy that does our taxes. But we're not nobody in the group, that's working that way, and
Right.
so it's we're careful about we don't allow other groups to come in and advertise on our sites. That's not allowed.
Right. I
So
mean, did during the time that you shared in AA, Bill, were there other child now adult people who had gone through childhood crimes that would come to you later and say, "Thank you for sharing. I also went through that."
on rare occasions. That happens now, of course. When you're
Hmm.
at an event, you're talking about you're giving a speech about child abuse. People do come up afterwards, but in AA, they're not there for that. So they may or may not hear something that they're willing to come up and tell you about. But frankly, that's not why they're there. And to them, this is so new to hear somebody talk about something like this
Hmm.
that I think I scare them sometimes. But at least I plant the seed that they
Right.
heard a guy who told his sober story, but used what had happened to him as a child by way of explaining why he drank so hard from the get-go.
Absolutely.
And
And
I
there are,
told
right. That's huge, Bill. I think that's such a huge part of it that you can, if you don't tell your story, then what I think they have that old term called a dry drunk, right? So if you don't go back and deal with your issues, you're not going to have a very good life anyway, right? And so I like to put less emphasis on alcohol and more emphasis on what's going on in your heart because that's really what the issue is as far as I see it, right? Is the more you grow and the more you heal and the more you get your story out and put more good in your life, the more the bad doesn't have room to continue to grow, right? Because um,
to, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people like I don't like rules either. It's funny that you say that, and I think probably um I don't think it's any part of defiance, but I think it's really kind of a part of grace that says we just don't want that anymore because number one, what did rules help anything? All the rules were broken, right? So rules don't really even help. I think self-discipline is a positive thing in life. But I don't like rules either. That's interesting that you bring that up. And my father was incredibly strict, very strict. He was my abuser,
My
so
family.
it's very different when it's outside of that. But everywhere you went, all authority, right, was very abusive to you. And so I think those kind of overlay somewhere in us is probably why we don't like authority and rules and that kind of thing, because it's not my favorite either.
And I got to point out that priests and brothers, I got to point out, are extreme authority figures as
Say
well.
that again.
And priests and brothers and nuns
Yes, yes.
are extreme uh, authority figures in the Catholic experience.
Exactly. Do you
So
find that you have problem with authority figures? Yeah, I mean, do you like authority?
no, I don't. I even volunteer for things like the LAPD, and I tried to volunteer for the fire department, but they don't have volunteers. It's all paid. And I belong to the board of a clinic in my neighborhood and so forth. So I no, I'm not. Authority is needed to some degree, but you don't have to
Yeah.
be
Oh,
mean
of
about it.
course. Yeah, of course.
That's what I don't like. My mother was a mean, authoritative person, and I didn't want that.
Right. And so when you
So
came to her
I,
and told her,
I tried not to.
yeah, do you didn't feel like she really came to you and comforted you like a mother should have?
Oh no, no.
Yeah. And see, and
She
that's
had
and
lost a couple of pregnancies before I came along, and she adopted me then, and was told she couldn't have kids.
oh, so
So
you
I
were
think that was
adopted.
always part of her experience, and my sister too. But I think that was part of the resentment my mother had that played out for Jane and I. But she didn't blame Jane and I for her not having kids. But the fact was we were there because she couldn't have her own kids.
I see.
So I think that was part of it. I don't know. Sure.
Right. Wow. Yeah, so that's a lot. I mean, that is a lot.
Recognize that part of it.
Right. And when we talk about it's
Yeah.
such a complicated thing and people always want to ask the question, why didn't you tell? Now, any of us who have lived through it, we already know why you don't tell because you're the design of how they groom us, the design of the fear, what they're doing to us is fearful. Can you talk a little bit about because you've been such an advocate for so long? Can you talk a little bit about why children don't tell and what that looks like when you're 11 years old and this horrible stuff starts happening to you?
It's almost a universal experience that small children who are abused in their youth um, keep their mouths shut. They may be told to do it. But we just understand we should do it. That's what we think.
Mhm.
Um, and this is pretty much universal.
It is.
So a big part of the challenge for advocates of healing from trauma is to get people to tell their story, because
Mhm.
it's in the telling of your story that you break the silence of it, and it has way less power when it's out in the open. Also, you
Yes.
can get, and until you say it, nobody knows. Nobody knows it went on. Nobody knows what it is that's bothering you. I mean, I was
Right.
tested all kinds of ways in grade school for what was wrong with me. No one ever asked me, were you abused in summer? Nobody ever asked me
Right.
that. I was
I've
tested
actually,
for all
yes,
different kinds of issues.
right. They don't ask the right questions.
Right. So the kid doesn't think he's supposed to talk about that. They didn't ask me. I was very confused about this. I thought I was the only one. Um, and that's common too.
Mhm.
It's also, in a lot of cases, a parent that's the abuser, and you don't want,
Mhm.
for a lot of reasons, you don't want to speak up. First of all, you're living under their roof, which is
Right.
pretty
Who's
dangerous if you
going to
want.
believe you all of
Um,
that?
all of that stuff, and so
Mhm.
it's extremely common. It's very rare. Let's put it the other way, very rare that a child will, on its own, approach an adult, usually a parent, and something about the neighbor who played with them yesterday,
Right. That's actually a really
so they
good way
don't.
to
So
say it. It is very rare that that happens. I hope that our
very well.
society is getting better around talking about this with children early and often, right? And coming around that. But I think we have a long way to go in society because again, people don't talk about it, Bill. And I just read this study the other day that said the average human being doesn't really, when you've been abused as a child, it's not until about 27 to 33, they say, that you really start talking about it. And you said you were 30. I was about the same age when I started talking about mine. And so, we can everything that we're doing is really telling people that it is okay to tell your story. It is no longer taboo, right? We were victims of crimes. Incest isn't a family problem, it's a crime, right? And anybody
All
that's hurting
sexual
you.
all sexual activity with a child is a
Yes.
crime.
Yes,
All of it,
Bill.
no
All
matter
of
what
it.
it is. They're all crimes.
That's right. Taking
So
pictures of you.
we don't
That
know
that
that. We don't
right.
know that as
Taking
kids.
pictures of you is horrible. And I
Oh,
and who knows how if he circulated those back then. That's horrible as a
exactly.
child to have that happen to you. I mean,
And he showed me little boy magazines, little, that had
right,
not
it's
my picture, but
horrible.
I was as he turned the pages, I could imagine that he was warning me or telling me that my images could show up in this magazine too, something like that. So I was always afraid, even well into my sobriety, that someone was going to walk up to me and say, "Isn't this you when you were 12?"
See, isn't
It
that
never happened, but
terrifying?
I
And
was.
but because pedophiles aren't going to do that. But think about that. When you went to your parents, they said, we didn't know that this kind of stuff happened. And yet you
Yeah.
knew that there were all of these boys, these small boys in these porn magazines for, child pornography. And
Yeah.
so of course it was happening. It's been happening
Yep.
since the beginning of time. But
Okay.
I'm so proud of you, Bill, for being a man of your age and your tenor, and that you're out here doing this work. When I came across you, it was so cool, and my heart just filled with you doing that because I know a lot of older people, and well, I'm 60. We're not that much apart. We're only 10 years apart. But you know what? A lot of people in our age ranges, they don't talk about it. They say, you know what? Yeah, that stuff happened, but I'm not talking about it. I had a friend of mine say, I know that my mom came to me and said my father raped me. I'm not talking about it. But I've also seen how it's kind of taken over her life. You know what I mean? And it's cost her in many ways. And so I think the cost of not talking about it is by far greater. You probably would have died of alcoholism had you not talked about it, right, Bill? We've got to get we're as sick as our secrets, you hear. And the truth is we really are as sick as our secrets, right?
Yeah, and that means that we're we have the opportunity to heal as much as we're willing to be honest and
Yes,
open.
yes. It's really that
It's,
simple. You know
the
what, Bill? It
opposite of
really
it.
is that simple. There is no formula other than
It
continue to
really
be
is.
honest. I love that. That is so beautiful. We're coming up at time, but I like to give it back to you. If you feel like there's anything that we haven't, again, we will put all of your links to all of your wonderful work that you're doing. And, every time I place it, we'll put it out there. But Bill, I'd like to give it back to you. If there's anything you feel like you'd like to just share with the person listening, I'm going to let you have the last little bit here.
Well, I do want to say that recovery does not just fall on you. You have to work for it. Uh,
Yes.
you have to work for it, whether you're talking alcoholism, drug addiction, or sexual abuse trauma. You have to work for it, and you can't assume that by osmosis you're going to get it. So there are ways that you can acquire the information. I mentioned the big book earlier. That's for AA, and the Alcoholics and Literature. Well, the website NAASCA is a plethora of information. It's deep
Mm,
and broad, with all kinds of stuff that's useful for the person who wants information. So it's as much an education site as it is a site for recovery. In fact, that's the two things we do. We
it's
educate the
awesome.
public, and we offer recovery to the still suffering child abuse person. We have the radio show that we talked about 5 nights a week. We have a meeting, a Zoom meeting, 3 times a week at a different time in the afternoon. We have um, we have an extensive contact sheet which anybody can be called, and they don't have to be anywhere near you. Our cell phones now, God bless them, they work
Right.
across the country for the same amount of money. So you can call anybody any time, and the only difference is, are they awake? Or willing to
Right.
call you back.
That is
So we
so
have a
true.
lot
You
of
guys,
volunteers on the
yes.
contact sheet.
Yes.
Yeah,
They
because we
have,
don't have an 800. We don't have a hotline. We have our own contacts, and there are dozens, of people all the time. This is a free thing, for everybody. So
no, it
why
is
not? Everybody
awesome.
should know about it.
Yes.
Um, uh, I guess that's about it. NAASCA go to NAASCA.org, of course, and poke around. Really, you can find almost everything off the front page, and it's designed so that if you click on something and it takes you somewhere else,
Mhm.
it's really taking you to a different page. So when you close that page, you're back at the front page, and that works no matter how deep you go into the website. You can't get lost. As long as you keep closing what you're reading, you come back to the home page. So it's designed. I'm the one that designed it, and I'm trying to make it idiot proof. Although sometimes I get caught in my own web.
Yeah, there is a lot of resources on there. Bill's right. There are a lot of resources. Bill, thank you so much. And if you're enjoying what we're doing, please subscribe and follow. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Let's Talk About It. Good night,
Thank you.
Bill.
God bless you, huh?
God bless
Be well.
you.
Bye bye now.
Bye bye.